Welcome again. Thank you for joining us today as we share this year's findings. We have a remarkably interesting results from the survey, as you might think, considering what's going on in the manufacturing sector. And the findings of the survey match closely to the findings of the 6 focus groups held throughout the state. You'll find those details interesting as Rob Autry, the founder of Meeting Street Insight, again for the 17th year, presents these results. I especially want to thank this year's sponsors who make the state of manufacturing possible. This year, we have 20 sponsors, 10 of which are industry-exclusive platinum sponsors. Let me introduce them individually. Fofinski, Mark & Johnson, a law firm that provides the skills and experience of a large firm with the culture of a small, with a dedicated team focused strictly on the manufacturing as a core industry. They've been a sponsor for 6 consecutive years. Granite Partner has been a platinum sponsor for the last 16 years. They are committed to acquiring and growing Minnesota companies in our state and keeping them here for the long term. DEED, the Department of Employment and Economic Development, provides programs to support job growth in the state of Minnesota and grow the economy, and manufacturing is considered a core to that. They also work with us to ensure that the state of manufacturing reaches as many Minnesota manufacturers as possible. They've been a sponsor for 11 years. All right, now who changed the direction of these slides? Old National Bank might be our newest or our oldest because they have been a platinum sponsor under the name of Bremer Bank, and they were the first bank to help sponsor it, and they've been with us for 11 years. And manufacturers are a core market for Bremer Bank and will continue to be under Old National. Olson Thielen is a full-service accounting and consulting firm that truly knows the needs of manufacturers, the challenges, and work with them to capitalize on the opportunities. They've been a platinum sponsor for 7 years. Production Workforce Professionals, or PRO, consist with a wide range of HR, payroll, and benefits and healthcare reform as they take those tasks off your hands so you as manufacturers can work on building product. They've been with us for 6 years. Productivity, which all the manufacturers in here I think are probably very familiar with, a single source distributor of CNC machines, tooling, industrial supplies, automation, and related manufacturing services. They've been a sponsor for 4 years. Our newest platinum sponsor is RAMP. This company modernizes finance operations with AI technology, combining travel and expense management, bill payments, and as they say, they not only save you time, they'll save you money. And lastly is Widseth, an engineering and architectural firm with offices in Minnesota and across the Midwest. 7 years, they've been a platinum sponsor for the state of manufacturing. That group is joined by our regional sponsors as we go around the state to 6 more locations to share these results. This is a group of individual companies, economic development, and technical colleges that are really supporters of manufacturing. And our focus group sponsors, economic development, technical colleges, again, it takes a community, and these people are all focused on helping manufacturing across the state of Minnesota. And lastly, what you all wanted to hear about, the beer sponsor is Forgotten Brew Company. So give those people a hand, would you please? You know, it's kind of inappropriate to follow the beer sponsors with the next introductions, but I will. We have 6 of our Minnesota legislators with us today. That's a record, and we appreciate it. Starting with Risa Damath from Cold Spring, and if I'm not mistaken, she's the Speaker of the House, and I'm not mistaken, she's a manufacturer along with her husband, Avon Plastics. Wonderful. Representative Tom Dipple from Cottage Grove. He's not only a manufacturer, but he's in the House of Representatives, and you'll see his friendly face later in a video. Senator Mark Corrin, District 28 of North Branch. I've toured a number of manufacturers with Mark, great proponent and supporter of manufacturing. Representative Drew Roach from Farmington, again, a great supporter. Representative Kristen Robbins from Maple Grove, probably been to more of these than any other representative. That's a hint to the others. But she's been here supporting us every year. Thank you. And lastly, Representative Dave Baker from Wilmer. Dave Baker is the chair of the Jobs Committee, and for manufacturers in this room that are taking advantage of the Made in Minnesota grant right now, thank Dave. He led the charge. Thank you to all for being with us. Thank you for your support of manufacturing. I'm not sure if they're clapping for them or for me stopping talking. In the Enterprise Minnesota magazine, at each table, you will find Rob's analysis of the data along with a story highlighting one of the focus groups that truly represents what you heard from the manufacturers this fall and you'll see in this survey. As you listen to the knowledgeable and experienced speakers we have invited today, I hope you'll keep one thing in mind: focus and control on what you can control. This year's business leaders expressed a little less pessimism about the overall economy and a slightly better outlook about their own prospects. But in capital letters, there was a significant underlying angst about factors that could upset those feelings and trends. Manufacturers have a deep, persistent concerns about the Minnesota business climate, taxes, and tariffs. Manufacturers have a strong record of facing change, uncertainty, and challenges from COVID, workforce shortages, supply chain disruptions. But through it all, Minnesota manufacturers keep showing up, solving problems, and finding ways to succeed. But now, as we face the rollout of Minnesota's paid family leave law and a tariff landscape that seems to change daily, we need the signature resilience and resourcefulness more than ever. It's easy to get distracted by those issues outside of our control. Headlines about tariffs, taxes, regulations, government regulations that we don't need create really a climate of profound uncertainty. The frustration is understandable and visible. But the manufacturers who thrive are the ones that will focus on what they can control. In a few minutes, you'll hear from Willy Shih, a professor from the Harvard Business School whose area of expertise is global supply chains. You might recognize Willy from 2 Q&A features in the Enterprise Minnesota magazine over the last 2 years. In the months and years of COVID, when supply chains were snarled with every possible global event, we talked with Willy about what could Minnesota manufacturers do to lessen the impact on their business because of those out-of-control events. Well, last summer, we reached out to Willy again for insight on how manufacturers could best manage supply chains given the onslaught of tariffs. Willy provided an astute roadmap for the manufacturers to best manage through these challenges, and you'll see that in his video. When it comes to regulations, particularly those mandated by the Minnesota legislature, there are steps that manufacturers can and should take to limit the negative effects of this government overreach. With respect to the paid leave laws, some companies still, I'm sad to say, don't have a solid plan to manage extended absences that could occur. So even though the labor market has cooled since the pandemic, many companies will still struggle to fill positions, particularly those that demand any kind of specialized training. This seems to be an issue that affects certain geographic areas more than others. In the metro area and Duluth focus groups, many leaders describe finding and retaining qualified workers was still the key issue to restrict their company's growth. But every area in the state faces the same reality. Skilled employees continue to age, and their knowledge will walk out the doors on retirement day with or without a plan in place. Savvy manufacturers constantly recruit, even if they don't have immediate openings, to ensure a smooth transition as part of their workforce leave. They also think creatively about solutions like fractional roles to fill gaps in areas such as quality, finance, and human resources. I'm here to announce that Enterprise Minnesota offers fractional consulting in the areas that we see critical to your business growth, including ISO quality systems, organizational development, executive coaching, and business planning, including the popular EOS Traction implementation. Finally, when it comes to things you can control, do not underestimate the power of culture. When employees take pride in their work and find the workplace enjoyable and flexible, you build loyalty and enjoy the benefits of long-term engaged employees, and it's easier to attract new talent. One more comment about an area that you might not be able to control, but you definitely can influence. We've seen the damaging effects of the legislature that has passed laws without understanding their impact on businesses and your employees. One of the best ways to prevent a repeat attack on manufacturing is to build relationships with your elected officials. Reach out to them. Even if you don't think they will agree with you on issues, let them know about the workers, their constituents, you employ, and the impact their decisions can and will have on them and their families. Share what you do to improve the quality of life in your community, in your region. At Enterprise Minnesota, we are delighted if we can work with you to schedule a tour of your facility. I myself have probably been in 400 manufacturing facilities, and you never, ever tire of learning what's made inside those walls. Manufacturers are a humble group. Sometimes you take too much pride in embodying Minnesota nice. That's great, until you need lawmakers to understand how valuable you are to our economy, and then it might be too late. So the landscape will keep shifting. Tariffs will vary, we know that. Supply chain challenges will ebb and flow, and government policies will change. External factors have always been there, and they always will be. What matters is how we all respond. Manufacturers I talk with stay positive because they focus their energy on where it matters most, inside their walls. When you cultivate relationships with suppliers and customers, improve processes and invest in your people, and get to know your elected officials, you'll find that you control and influence more than you may think. As we listen to our presenters from the Small Business Administration, to Willy Shih and Rob Autry, keep in mind that those manufacturers and all of us who thrive are the ones that focus on and control what we can. And now, I'd like to introduce the two gentlemen from the Office of Advocacy, the U.S. Small Business Administration, Andrew Coffield and Geoffrey. Gentlemen.
Good afternoon, friends and colleagues. My name is Jeff Grove. I'm honored to join you at this year's State of Manufacturing Conference hosted by Enterprise Minnesota. As the National Advocate for Manufacturing, Energy, and Technology at the SBA Office of Advocacy, my mission is to bring the voices and concerns of Minnesota's small manufacturers to the highest levels of policymaking. My background is in manufacturing. I ran a fastener manufacturing company for almost 40 years before selling the company and taking this position. My secretary was Microsoft Outlook. The person I delegated the administration and problems to looked me in the mirror every morning. I understand the problems that small businesses and especially small manufacturing businesses face. My company made aerospace and defense products that carried DFARS regulations. I dealt with cybersecurity and SAM, and every year I agonized over health insurance cost increases. Minnesota's manufacturing landscape is built on the ingenuity and resilience of small firms. Over 84% of manufacturers here employ fewer than 50 people, drive more than $57 billion in economic activity, and anchor communities from the Twin Cities to the most rural corners of the state. Your entrepreneurship powers the region's future and provides more than 11% of Minnesota's jobs. But I know that optimism is tempered by serious regulatory challenges. Over the past year, Minnesota's small manufacturers have faced a proliferation of new and often overlapping mandates. New regulations on lead, cadmium, and PFAS have introduced some of the strictest standards in the country. Compliance means costly testing, constant supply chain oversight, biennial reporting with detailed progress timelines for exemptions, and meticulous documentation and record keeping. Alongside these environmental requirements, you're adapting to changes in packaging, wage and benefit laws, paid leave mandates, and rising administrative obligations. The reality is clear. Small firms are shouldering a regulatory load designed with larger businesses in mind, and the cumulative impact is a real threat to innovation, growth, and even basic survival for some businesses. As your SBA Office of Advocacy, I take this message to Washington and to St. Paul that regulations must be right-sized. They must protect health, safety, and the environment, but they must also be clear, consistent, and scaled for the resources of small employers. That's why we advocate for simplified and synchronized reporting and compliance requirements across agencies to save you time and reduce costly confusion. Proportional standards and processes that distinguish between major corporations and local job creators. Expanded technical assistance, grant support for compliance costs, and streamlined access to regulatory guidance. Better coordination between federal and state rules, and clearer one-stop compliance resources for businesses. As national advocate, my charge is to advocate for a regulatory environment that supports, not stifles, your success. We need your input to inform rulemaking, to target reforms, and to ensure small manufacturers are part of every solution. Minnesota's future depends on a strong, adaptive manufacturing base. Let's work together to ensure our laws foster growth, reward hard work, and make compliance achievable for every manufacturer in this great state. Thank you for the vital work you do and for the opportunity to be your bridge to a better policy. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Andrew Coffield, and I am the Regional Advocate for the Great Lakes region. As Jeff mentioned, we work for the Office of Advocacy, and in my role, I advocate for all small businesses within Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, and the great state of Minnesota. I'm 6 states. It takes a while to keep track of all of them. So I've been in the political sphere in government and helping small businesses for over a decade. And in today's era of deregulation, I've never quite seen anything like it, and it is a prime opportunity for small businesses. So the Office of Advocacy is an independent agency from SBA. And so I apologize, I don't give out loans or anything like that, so don't come up looking for money from me. Our office focuses on providing a voice for small business owners in the regulatory agenda. We report to our chief counsel, which is Dr. Casey Mulligan. It is our first chief counsel in almost 8 years. On his first day in office, he reported to Congress a massive report analyzing more than 12,000 rules that impact small business owners. He has also worked with Administrator Kelly Loeffler to pledge to cut $100 billion in regulatory costs for small businesses. And so far, we've cut about $48 billion. So our office has 3 main functions, and our first function is our research department. We have a team of researchers in Washington, D.C. that really analyze the small business data and statistics, and they provide reports to Congress, the White House, and agencies to better understand how the small business world looks across the country. We have 2025 state profiles of Minnesota. They're right up here on the front table, so make sure to grab one. It provides a really good insight into the industries, the business size, and the demographics of Minnesota small business owners. We also released last week our 2025 major metropolitan area map, which is also very handy. It breaks it down in the major metropolitan areas in the Midwest. We also provide data on industries, and this year we released a great document on how manufacturing and regulations, the regulations that hurt manufacturing. The second component of our office is outreach, and we have 10 regional advocates, which is what Jeff and I are, and we have 2 that focus on industry. So we have Jeff that focuses on manufacturing, and we have one that focuses on rural affairs. We travel across the United States because our job is simple. It's to hear from you, the small business owner, and help amplify your voice, your challenges, and your burdens in Washington, D.C. We do this through roundtables, touring small businesses, and just chatting one-on-one with businesses. And earlier today, Luke with Spectro Alloy was gracious enough to give us a tour, and we sat down and met with the Monticello Peer Council, who gave us some great insights on some of the regulatory burdens you guys are facing. That brings us to the third part of our office, which is our main function, and that is regulations. Our agency is typically in the pre-regulatory stage and providing comments for small business owners to the agencies in the government. In the era that we're in now, President Trump signed an executive order stating that for every new regulation, 10 must be cut. And when I say I've never seen anything like it, we have agencies doing open comment periods looking for regulations from small business owners and from the average American to get rid of. When I first started this role, I asked ChatGPT, how many federal regulations are there? ChatGPT came back with, I don't know. There are 175,000 pages in the Federal Register, and I can't calculate how many regulations there are. Clearly, we have too many regulations. So we have a team of attorneys in Washington, D.C. that work with agencies and try to help amplify your voice in Washington, D.C. So our roles as regional advocates in the Office of Advocacy is to be your megaphone. And in the era of deregulation, we are looking for small business owners to tell us what of these regulations are burdensome. What of these regulations are duplicative? Maybe these regulations are outdated. We are looking for all of the regulations that hinder your growth as small businesses. We also work very closely with the SBA Office of National Ombudsman. And if you're not familiar with the National Ombudsman, they work with businesses and fight on your behalf if you feel like you've been treated unfairly, or if you feel that you received an excessive fine. And this is a great underutilized resource office. We've worked hand in hand with them of trying to help alleviate the burden on you, the small business owner. Earlier this year, we launched the Red Tape Hotline. And I'm going to give you 4 ways that the Red Tape Hotline, you can reach out through the Red Tape Hotline. This hotline is key to our office. You can reach out to us day or night and report burdensome regulations and how they impact your business. Are they costing you money? Are they costing you time? There are 4 ways you can submit that vital information so we can get it in front of the agencies. You can call us at 800-827-5722, option 3. You can email us at redtape@sba.gov. Or you can submit a form online at advocacy.sba.gov, which is also where we post our roundtables, and we do a lot of really great roundtables throughout the year. Or you can call your regional advocates or talk with us as we're drinking some of that wonderful beer, right? In closing, I want to thank Bob, Lynn, Don, and the entire Enterprise Minnesota team for inviting us to speak with you today, and I look forward to hearing your regulations later on this evening.
So I know a lot of the manufacturers were saying, SBA, we're going to hear about a loan? Andrew was with us in St. Cloud about a month ago or so and spoke at 7 manufacturers, and Don Loberg, who helped coordinate that, and I said, we got to get this person back here. We did not know about the Office of Advocacy. Thank you both for joining us today. We appreciate it. And I'm sure you'll have some takers on your request for conversation. The next speaker is Willy Shih. And I have to say beforehand is that you looked at the profile. If you did not look at their profile, you said, oh, what do we got? A professor from Harvard going to tell us what manufacturing is about? Well, Willy Shih and I go back 30 years. Willy was a customer of mine, and he had 25 years in business before, in 2007, he went to Harvard. He's a very unique individual that he brings this business sense to the operations in Harvard. And he has seen some of the finest manufacturing, but his passion really is how to deal with unforeseen issues, primarily around supply chain. So with that, Willy Shih.
Good afternoon. I'm Willy Shih, and I teach at the Harvard Business School. I would like to add my welcome to you at the 17th Annual State of Manufacturing Survey Release event. I've known Bob Kill for 3 decades now, and he and I both share a deep interest and belief in the importance of manufacturing and its link to innovation. I pay a lot of attention to what's going on in places like Minnesota, Wisconsin, Indiana, Kentucky, the Midwest, where I grew up. So when he asked me to speak with you, my first thought was, of course, I'd love to, but I told Bob I have classes at this time of year, so it's hard for me to travel on class days. So he suggested I make this video, and I hope this will be an okay substitute. Many people on the coast, and especially in Washington, talk about manufacturing and bringing manufacturing back to these shores. But the real action is in places like yours where the work is actually getting done, places like here. So it's a pleasure and an honor to talk with you today. You're going to see the survey results shortly. I think you will find them to be pretty interesting. But before that, let me share what I've been thinking about. These are challenging times, challenging because a lot of things are changing. And those changes are sometimes pretty sudden, and I don't have to tell you the timing is often hard to predict. Let me make that impossible to predict. In fact, I'm recording this video just a few days before this meeting you are attending now, and my guess is that some parts of it could be obsolete by the time you see it. For example, the Supreme Court is hearing a case today on the legality of the IEEPA tariffs, so who knows what tomorrow will bring. Depending on who prevails in that case, a lot could change by tomorrow. The rapid changes in tariffs have really impacted the global trading environment, though I should say that while the U.S. historically has been the largest single trading partner for most countries, we only participate in about 15% of overall global trade. The other 85% is between and among countries other than us. We shouldn't forget that. So while trading with American companies and supplying goods to the American consumer is getting more expensive, we should also be looking at secondary impacts if we want to understand how they affect us here in the U.S. The first of those is the diversification of sourcing, which has been driven by many American importers, but is starting to take hold more broadly. This really started before the pandemic, but the pandemic threw this into overdrive when we suddenly recognized how dependent we as a country were on China for so many products, components, and even metals and critical minerals, and how vulnerable that could make us. There's certainly been a lot of action in that area in the last week. This vulnerability has manifested itself in China plus one strategies, which means I might continue producing in China, but I'm going to have an alternate source of supply. This has resulted in a lot of production moving to Southeast Asia, especially Vietnam, and also Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, and Cambodia, although the latter two are still really hard work. On a positive note, that means some sourcing has come back to the U.S. If there is a company here that can do the work, because people are more willing to deal with the cost disadvantage in exchange for some more resilience and being close to the market, that's great. Tariffs help that, obviously, but we shouldn't forget that it's just like hot money that moves around, and that business can leave as readily and as quickly as it showed up. The second shift, which we don't feel as much in this country, but will affect our exports in a big way, is that as we make it harder for China to export to the U.S., the tremendous manufacturing overcapacity in Chinese industry is flooding into other markets around the world. For a while, it has been flooding into Europe, and it still is, but they're starting to clamp down over there too, because they don't want their home market manufacturers wiped out either. So that stuff is going to Southeast Asia and the global south. I've been to Africa twice in the last 4 months, and Chinese imports, appliances, consumer goods, cars, steel, aluminum, telecom equipment, trucks big and small, buses, industrial goods are all flooding in. That has implications for their local economies, of course, but I was talking to a former student and large investor in East and West Africa, and he said, as an American, it pains him, but he's telling his companies and partners to buy Chinese because the costs are half or less what the American products cost. That's the third thing, the loss of competitiveness of American exports. Now, the core problem here is that input costs here are rising, whether it's steel, aluminum, and copper, precision equipment, or imported components in many, many commodities. Or maybe it's the higher costs for warehousing and holding all those intermediate goods inventories that importers tried to front run before the tariffs took hold, or the cost of trucks or the effects of the weaker dollar. I saw in Indiana imports in January and February of this year were double the previous record and jumped to 4 times the previous record in March. Across the U.S., March 2025 imports of all goods were highest on record. Capital goods, highest on record. Consumer goods, highest on record. Imports from Mexico were highest on record. Imports from the UK were highest on record. Ireland, Germany, Italy, all of these were highest on record. Imports from India and Vietnam were highest on record as well. And by the way, imports from China were the lowest since the start of the pandemic in March 2020. Now, what that means is that people brought in a lot of inventory, and it takes time to burn through all those inventories. And as we do that and restock at higher costs, those costs are going to get passed along. So even though there might be certain days when tariffs go into effect, like earlier this year, the impact gets spread out depending on when a particular supplier has to replenish. I talked to one manufacturer at the beginning of April and asked him how much product he brought in. He said they were good until Christmas, but they had to rent parking lots and fill them with 53-foot trailers stuffed with merchandise. But if you look at the pricing of their products, it's gone up dramatically at retail. And in their case, what used to cost $22 at the store now sells for $38 at retail. What used to sell for $33 now sells for $57. Now, if you're a manufacturer and you're importing components like magnets or small motors or fasteners or extrusions, you've probably seen some of this stuff. The other thing I realized when I was doing price comparisons is that a lot of things like tools, we don't buy them every week or with any regularity. So it's not like when you go to the supermarket and you're buying shrimp, which thanks to the 50% tariff on India, where we get a lot of our shrimp in this country, we feel the pain pretty quickly. Or it's not like energy prices, but it's this time lag on cost increases that eventually pass through the system. It's kind of like boiling the frog by raising the temperature gradually. It's easy to not pay attention as the temperature rises. Eventually we're cooked. So my message to you and to everyone manufacturing in the U.S. is we have to keep working on productivity. Face it, we are a high-cost country, so anything with a lot of labor content in it, we've got to get high productivity to compensate for it, whether it's through automation, using data and AI, or my favorite play, plain old hard work of getting your lean manufacturing right with continuous improvement and frontline problem solving, getting down to single-piece flows rather than large batches, eliminate waste, but get the basics right and then bring in your AI or whatever, or your automation. You know, I visited a Toyota factory last year, and you would think they had gotten all this down, but they were working on improving their operations every single day. I mean, every day. They were trying to build in more and more flexibility and resilience into what I saw was a ready and outstanding operation. As I walked around the plant floor with the plant manager, I asked him, it's like, you're building sedans, and the Detroit guys have given up on building sedans, but you're using American labor. Your parts are mostly made in Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana, Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, and you're using American-made steel. I was trying to get the price he paid for steel out of him, but he wasn't going to tell me, of course. He just said, we have a strategic relationship with our suppliers. But they were rebuilding one of their two main assembly facilities, building in more flexibility because they knew they couldn't predict the order mix that well. And they were not satisfied with what they had, and they probably will never be. Okay, and these guys are among the best manufacturers out there, and they're working hard every day to improve the efficiency and productivity of their operations. I think all of us could benefit from a little of that. We're a high-cost country, so productivity is going to be the key to manufacturing staying alive and thriving here. Availability of labor and the ability to retain labor and skills will continue to be a big challenge. I don't have any magic bullets here other than being productive and being competitive has a way of buying you a lot of headroom to invest in and develop your team. The government can help us too, whether it's federal or state or local, by making our lives simpler. I'm quite confident I don't need to tell you that means less regulation. Or I would frame that as better regulations that recognize the reality of the challenges we face in business every day. I can hear the groans from you 1,000 miles away, by the way. Now, I've worked with folks in Washington for the past several administrations now, not so much the current Trump administration, though I've tried, but I did try to help during Trump 1 and the administrations of Biden and Obama. What I've come to appreciate is that government people are pretty far removed from what you do and what you face every day, whether they're elected officials, appointed, or career civil servants, because they work on different stuff. They don't have to worry about not being able to start a shift because too many people didn't show up. You know, and until recently, it's probably still the case, they never had to make a payroll or worry about not getting paid or collecting accounts receivable. That means you have to educate them. That's what I try to do every chance you get and at all levels. That means getting in front of government people, whether elected or appointed or career civil servants, and educating them on the challenges facing you. If you can do that, collectively through trade organizations. That's one path. But you might be surprised how little they know about actually running a factory or business. Longer term, I think the real question is how will we maintain competitiveness in a global environment? So productivity and building and resilience, that'll serve you well. Thanks for hearing me out, and I want to wish you all the best and enjoy the rest of this conference. Thank you.
Whenever I see Willy, I realize that he had black hair when I met him. But, you know, he has some great messages, whether you're focused, and he's been in some of the largest, most sophisticated manufacturing plants. But one thing he makes the comment about the continuous improvement before you buy a machine and think it's going to solve some magic problem. So it's a really basic, whether you're talking about large manufacturers, small manufacturers, or medium. But the heart and soul of manufacturing clearly is small and mid-sized manufacturers. Statistic in Minnesota, 7,300 manufacturers. 54% are 10 employees or less. 84% are 50 and less. That's the heartbeat. That's the lungs. That's everything in manufacturing, because they are the suppliers to the well-known large companies. So we're glad to have Rob Autry back. 17 years ago, he's the one that convinced us to stop doing this in the middle of the winter. But, you know, it's been a great honor because, you know, people often ask, why do you have a registered pollster do this? And we want this to be credible data and data that you can share with a non-manufacturer who needs to learn more about the power of this industry. Rob, the podium is yours.
Thank you, Bob. It's never a good sign when they start the timer here. When we started this project back in December of 2008, we were all living and working in a much different world, right? We were in the midst of a good old-fashioned recession. The authors and architects were starting to piece together healthcare reform, which would later become known as Obamacare. And we were all kind of dealing with this little thing called a global financial collapse. Those were the good old days. Fast forward to today, things are a little bit different. You'll see in this year's survey that the outlook is one of cautious optimism. Confidence is up, but also concerns about government mandates as well. Tariffs are back in the headlines, and for many manufacturers, they're on their balance sheets. And you'll see in the data to this year as well, AI is clearly knocking on the factory door. After 17 years of doing this survey, there's one thing I've learned. It's become crystal clear. And that's Minnesota manufacturers can just about survive anything, including a 45-minute survey presentation for me. So with that, I know I'm kind of standing in between happy hour here. Let's get into this year's data. In terms of what we did, and we've done this for all 17 years of the survey, we interviewed 400 manufacturing executives statewide. These are CEOs, CFOs, COOs, presidents, vice presidents, owners, the individuals in a company that are making strategic business decisions for that company. We spent an average of 25 minutes with them on the phone discussing the issues important to them. All told, we're talking about over 215 hours of interviews. And in addition to that 400 sample, we also, for the last 10 years, have been doing additional interviews in 6 of the Initiative Foundation regions, those regions outside the Twin Cities and greater Minnesota, so that we have larger sample sizes to better understand what's happening in all corners of the state. With that, let's start with this year's survey. So when it comes to the economy, this is sort of true to Minnesota fashion. It's not going great. It's not going terrible. It's just kind of flat. And what we see in this year's survey is that a majority, the highest level we've seen in the 17 years, 59% describe the economy we're in now as a flat economy. That's up 17 points from where it was a year ago. We have seen a drop in concerns about recession, and you'll see this throughout the data set here. It's down 19 points from a year ago. 22% believe we're in a recession, but it's not as if they believe the economy is growing. Only 18% of manufacturing executives believe we're in a year of economic expansion. Again, 6 out of 10 believe we're in a flat economy. And I will tell you, having done this particular questions you could see for the last 17 years, it's pretty clear that the biggest export from Minnesota manufacturers is confidence, because this data has not moved at all. Back in December of 2008, 79% of manufacturers were confident about the future of their company. At level stayed high, it got to the low 90s at one point. This year it's at 87%. Only 12% of manufacturers are not confident about the future of their company. Now, you will note, compared to where we were a year ago, where we did see sort of a bump up in pessimism, a drop in optimism at 80%, we are up 7 points in terms of the confidence rating. A lot of that is coming from smaller manufacturers. Almost all of it is coming from smaller manufacturers. Those who have 50 or fewer employees, their confidence level is up 9 points this year, whereas the larger manufacturers have pretty much leveled off. While optimism is on the rise, when it comes to the state's business climate, opinions are a little more frosty. 53% of manufacturing executives believe that the business climate in the state is worse today than it was 5 years ago. So for the second consecutive year, a majority of manufacturing executives believe the economy or business climate has gotten worse. 28% believe it's the same as it was 5 years ago. Only 17% of manufacturing executives believe the economy today is better than it was 5 years ago. Now, on the positive side, we've seen a little bit of uptick in a couple of key business metrics. As you might recall, we asked manufacturing executives, when it comes to revenue, when it comes to profitability, when it comes to capital expenditures, as you think about this year, do you expect those to go up, go down, or largely stay the same? What you're looking at here is the percent who expect to see increases in those three metrics. And this year, 32% of manufacturing executives believe that their revenue, gross revenue, is going to go up. That's up 8 points from a year ago. 27% believe their profitability is going to go up. That's up 6 points from a year ago. Capital expenditures at 31% is largely staying about where it's been for the last couple of years. What's really fascinating about this data too, though, is if you look at where we are now, at the far right side, compared to where we were at the pandemic, obviously we're not nearly in as optimistic and glorious times as we were then. Also, you see quite a bit of volatility here since the pandemic. Now, that really only tells a little bit of the story, because when you compare this data to where we are a year ago, and you look at it across all metrics, we do see that bump up in the blue bars, which is the expected increases in gross revenues from the left, profitability in the middle, capital expenditures on the right. But you also see those red bars are pretty significant. And that's the percent who are expecting to see decreases. So in terms of gross revenues, this year, 32% believe we're going to have increases in their gross revenues, 32% expect to see decreases. So they're pretty flat. When it gets to profitability, though, 27% expect to see an increase, 35% expect to see their gross profit or the profitability decline this year. So there are more manufacturers expect to see a decrease in profitability than an increase. And capital expenditures, again, has been pretty flat over the last 3 to 4 years. Now, looking specifically at gross revenue projections, because we've been tracking this over the 17 years, last year what we saw was pretty dramatic data. Outside of the survey that we did in September of 2020, in the midst of the pandemic, it was the only other time where we had seen the percent of manufacturers expect to see decreases in gross revenues at 40 or higher. Last year's numbers were worse than what we saw in December of 2008. It's rebounded a little bit here, as you can see there. It's dropped 8, gone up 8. We're at parity in terms of increase, decrease. But historically, these numbers aren't nearly as good as what we saw and experienced since the pandemic, or before the pandemic. Since the pandemic, though, you can just see how much of a roller coaster manufacturers have been on when it comes to gross revenues. And then the other dynamic here is the difference between smaller and larger manufacturers. The numbers are much more rosier with larger manufacturers. By a 12-point margin, they're more likely to believe that their gross revenues are going to go up, whereas the smaller manufacturers, those under 50 employees, by a 4-point margin, believe their gross revenues are going to go down. For smaller manufacturers, profitability is -11 in terms of increase, +7 for larger manufacturers. And not much of a difference on capital expenditures, but again, noticeable differences between smaller and larger manufacturers. So what are the things that are keeping manufacturers up at night? Well, let me start with what's not keeping them up at night. And this year, it's concerns about inflation. If you go towards about the middle of that chart there, overall inflation, 30% rate this as a high level of concern to them and their company. That's down 23 points from a year ago. A year ago, it was the #1 concern that manufacturers had. Today, it's around 7th. What's kind of taken its place? Those 4 at the top. Concerns about government policies and regulations, 53% have a high level of concern about that particular issue. Taxes at 44, tariffs at 42. And so next, I'm going to introduce you to a couple of manufacturers, Ryan and Tom. I'm going to talk a little bit about their experiences on some of these issues.
I'm Ryan Dainert. I'm the CEO of Plymold, and we are located in Kenyon, Minnesota. We manufacture furniture and fixtures primarily for the food service market and also the workplace market. Plymold has been in business since 1947. We are an employee-owned company. We have been, this is actually our 40th year of employee ownership. We do a lot of manufacturing under one roof of a variety of materials. So there's not a lot of places where you're actually working with metal products, upholstery products, laminated wood products, all in the same facility. And so that provides unique challenges, but certainly some advantages in the marketplace. Kenyon's a pretty small town in rural Minnesota. We have just over 100, about 110 employees right now. And the workforce availability in recent years certainly has been a challenge. Coming out of COVID, it was very difficult to find enough qualified candidates to help us scale with the growth that we were seeing. We really need policymakers to focus on the critical areas of competitiveness. How do we lower the cost of doing business in the state of Minnesota? How do we provide a able, trained workforce that's ready to go? Those are going to be the key areas that we as manufacturers are going to need help.
My name's Tom DePel, and I'm the CEO and owner of Minnesota Dental Lab. We operate here in Newport, Minnesota. I'm also a state legislator at the Capitol for District 41B. We produce a multitude of different items in the dental manufacturing world. And functionally, this business is split into kind of a 50-50. We have the surgical guide or guided surgery department, and then on the other side of the business, we have the manufacturing or restorative department, and we 3D print about 10 to 20 surgical guides a day. And to give you a little bit of perspective on that, most dental labs may only produce 1 or 2 surgical guides a week. Being an elected official is definitely a unique experience, and the process of trying to represent your district well, your constituents, and keep your promises that you made to them when you were campaigning. And some of the main messages that I set forth were, I'm never going to raise taxes. Taxes are very high in Minnesota, both property taxes, state income taxes. Business taxes are the highest in the entire country in Minnesota. I've tried to take my business experience here, being on the forefront, understanding how business works. We need a strong economy in Minnesota. If we don't have a strong economy, we're not going to have jobs. The feedback that I get from other businesses is, we're struggling. We don't want higher taxes here. We don't want higher property taxes. We don't want more mandates. We want a simplified structure that allows us to focus on our business instead of focusing on regulation.
So no matter where you are in Minnesota, concerns about government policies is certainly top of mind. What we did here is look at the top 5 concerns in each of those 6 Initiative Foundation regions. And you can see at the top of the list is either taxes, government policies, or tariffs. And in certain cases, taxes being a really big issue in the Northwest Minnesota Foundation. But in the Northland Foundation, 60% of manufacturing executives have a high level of concern about government policies, equally high there in the West Central Initiative. But across the state, we see still significant concerns about government policies. So after years of post-pandemic chaos related to workforce issues, we have seen a little bit of subsiding in terms of concerns related to attracting qualified workers and retaining qualified workers. Since 2021, the percentage of manufacturers who say attracting qualified workers is a high-level concern from them has gone from 61, its highest point over the 17 years we tested it, down to 40. And we've also seen an equal decline among those who are concerned about retaining qualified workers. Important thing here to note, though, when you look at merging this data, still 48% of manufacturers tell us they have a high level of concern about either attracting qualified workers or retaining qualified workers. So when you merge those together, it would be the second highest concern overall next to government policies. So it's not gone away. Costs, workers, tariffs, climate, specifically the business climate, are the things that manufacturers tell us could negatively impact their future growth the most. Numbers we saw that were very similar to last year. Obviously, tariffs is a new entry into this question. But you can see even the biggest gains that we've seen here in terms of cost of health insurance, but also unfavorable business climate, is up 3 points. And here again, another piece of data that shows you down at the bottom there, inflation has subsided in terms of concern level for manufacturers. Clearly, smaller companies, smaller manufacturers in terms of revenue here are feeling the cost pinch a little bit more than your higher revenue, larger manufacturers. Those larger manufacturers are more focused on workforce-related issues, on tariffs, and particularly on the unfavorable business climate in the state in terms of what could negatively impact their future growth. Listen, at the end of the day, the best way to grow your customer base is to find new customers. And that's what manufacturers are telling us. In terms of important drivers of their future growth, 58% of manufacturers say it's finding new customers. That's up 9 points from where it was a year ago. It is by far the biggest area where they see the biggest potential for growth. I will also point out, there's a couple of these that saw significant increases in this year's data. In addition to new customers, and you can see down at the bottom there, new products, increasing productivity, up 13 points in terms of a factor to drive future growth. Effective strategy and implementation, up 13 points, and implement and using automation, up 9 points, the highest level that we've seen in the years of asking this question. When it comes to suppliers, what manufacturers say they are looking for is looking primarily at a formal quality program and financial strength. When combined, roughly 9 out of 10 manufacturers say those are the 2 most important criteria when they're looking for suppliers. Both have seen noticeable increases. We do see a switch here, though, over the last year. Last year, the number 1 criteria was financial strength, then quality programs. Today, those numbers have reversed. All right, so hiring is picking up a little bit this year. A year ago, we found 41% of manufacturers who said they had positions that were open and they were hiring. That was the lowest level in the 16 years that we have been doing this research. It's bounced up to 47%, up 6 points. Still not a majority, but still 47% of manufacturers are hiring. But when it comes to hiring, it's kind of a little bit more of a sprinkle than it is a downpour. Only 8% of manufacturers in our survey said they are hiring, and they're hiring at least 10% of their positions. Most of those positions they're looking for are just a handful. I think we're seeing some pretty good trend lines here in terms of how difficult it is to find the workers that manufacturers need. It's still high and it's still difficult. You can see on the left-hand side here, those red bars are the percent who say it's difficult to attract qualified candidates to companies like theirs. Today, it's 80% of manufacturers who say that, similar to what we saw a year ago. It is down from where it was in 2021. But where we've seen the real movement is on the percentage who say it's very difficult to find the workers they need. 5 years ago, it was 55% who said it was very difficult. Today, it's only 32%, a significant drop in that intensity number. We also see that larger manufacturers are the ones who are out there hiring, and not surprisingly, the ones who are finding it difficult to find the workers they need. We talked a little bit earlier about how workforce-related issues were more pronounced among your bigger manufacturers. If you go down to the bottom of this chart here, we combine two questions here, the percent who said they are hiring and the percent who say it's difficult to attract qualified candidates. Those smaller manufacturers with 50 or fewer employees, about a third of them say they are hiring and it's difficult to find the workers they need, compared to 69% of your larger manufacturers who are hiring and say it's difficult to find the workers they need. So when it comes to attracting qualified workers, companies tell us they primarily want to be known for their work-life balance, their safe work environment, and competitive salaries. That's where a majority of manufacturers tell us they want to be known for, with numbers that are very, very similar to what we saw a year ago. Smaller companies are largely focused on that family work-life balance, that safety, that salary. Whereas when it comes to the larger manufacturers, they almost take the approach of why not check every box. So when it comes to industry leader, great benefits, career growth, all things that they want to be known for in addition to those we've just mentioned. Next, on the topic of automation, we asked manufacturers, what are some of the reasons why you're exploring or considering exploring automation? And by far, it comes down to increasing productivity. 44% say that's the primary reason why they're considering or exploring automation, up 12 points from where it was a year ago. Again, a more pronounced focus and attention placed on increasing productivity, eliminating repetitive tasks, improving workforce safety, considerably far below that. 40% of manufacturers, though, tell us at this point they are not considering automation. And I like to say everybody loves the idea of automation until they get the invoice, because you can see here the biggest challenge and obstacle they face when trying to implement automation is that high upfront investment and cost. 48%, almost half of all manufacturers, that's the biggest challenge they have to implementing that. Difficulty integrating with existing systems, lack of internal technical expertise is a distant second and third there. Importantly, 27% say they haven't really faced any challenges at all when it comes to implementing automation. Introducing AI and automation into this and where they think it would have the most positive effect. First and foremost, it's helping with decision making. It's helping with scheduling and workflow efficiency and automating the tasks that no one really wants to do, those repetitive manual tasks. Those are the three areas where a lot of manufacturers say AI and automation could have the most positive impact in their company. And I think importantly here, larger companies are clearly seeing more positive benefits from using AI and automation. In addition to those three, almost half of those larger manufacturers see positive benefits when it comes to improving inventory and supply chain management. Almost 4 out of 10 say it comes to improving quality. 93% of those larger manufacturers down at the bottom see AI and automation providing some positive impact on their company. That's 30 points higher than the smaller manufacturers. The biggest fear specifically when it comes to adopting AI in their company, importantly, it's not robots taking over the factory. It's more of understanding exactly what on earth AI can do for them. 33% say that's the case. Concerns about data issues and privacy and cybersecurity, 32% mention that. Those are the two biggest concerns. It is important to note that almost 7 out of 10 manufacturers do have some level of concern when it comes to adopting AI in their business. And this perhaps is not surprising. Those larger manufacturers, those who have more people involved with AI, are also the ones who tend to have more concerns and worries about AI than smaller manufacturers. They're concerned about that lack of understanding of what AI could do, the privacy, the cybersecurity, the data governance issues. Clearly, about half say they're concerned with both of those particular issues, but their level of concern is noticeably higher than the smaller manufacturers. Again, smaller manufacturers aren't adopting AI nearly at the same levels as the larger manufacturers are. Okay. We asked executives, does your company have a formal strategy for adopting automation and AI? Which of these comes closest to what's going on in your company today? If you look at the top 2 bars there, that yes, we have a formal strategy with documented goals and timelines. 4% of manufacturers say that describes them and their company. We have a formal strategy in development, 6%. So you have about 10% of manufacturers who have specific goals and a formal approach or strategy related to AI. The other 90% do not. 28% say they have an informal ad hoc approach, and then 61% say have no strategy currently at all when it comes to adopting automation and AI.
Hi, I'm Marcus Amble. I'm president of MTG Incorporated. We're located in Glenwood, Minnesota. We specialize in smaller components, medical and aerospace. The stuff that you can fit right in your hand, that's the stuff that we prefer. We can do larger items. Our customers are mainly geared towards the smaller, mission-critical flight components. We do surgical tools, drill devices, some brain surgery type components. It's very specialized within the industry. We don't have a lot of competition, and that's pretty good for us, I guess. In terms of growth, we have grown the company quite a bit already. When I came back 12 years ago, it was 3 of us, and we are up to 10 employees right now. And so the trick has been to grow responsibly and sustainably. You don't want to grow too big too fast, and that'll bring its own challenges. Our strategy to work within the tariff climate has been monitoring our inputs, the pricing, the grinding wheels that we have to buy, the centers, the coolant, all of the inputs that go into our daily operations. We have to monitor those a little closer than we used to because we have to make sure that we are staying competitive on our price and we can stay profitable. One of the biggest obstacles is understanding greater lead times that we have to face. There's been times where if you have to place an order for a wheel for, say, 500 parts, I could get that wheel in within 3-4 weeks. If depending on how many parts you have to run, how many consumables, how many grinding wheels, you may be looking at 12 to 14 weeks to get those grinding wheels. And so it really requires a little more diligence to make sure that you are being spot on with what you need when you need it.
My name is Paul Garkey. I am the president and general manager of the North Central Group. North Central Group is part of Skippy Companies. We are based here in St. Cloud, Minnesota. We have approximately 130 employees. Under the North Central Group name, we have 2 different business units. We are a Bluebird school bus dealer as well as a commercial bus dealer for multiple commercial bus lines. And we are also a upfitter where we upfit light and medium duty truck equipment as well as emergency vehicle upfits, lightings, partitions, anything that goes on an emergency vehicle. I think some of the volatility both sides of the business have experienced around tariffs has been a bit of a challenge for us to navigate. We've been able to mitigate that by being very transparent with our customers, and we've absorbed some of the tariff costs that we've been hit with, and we've asked the customers to absorb some of the tariff costs that we've been hit with. So we try to make it a partnership with our customers, so we're sharing in that burden.
In terms of tariffs, about 85% of our product is manufactured in the U.S. The uncertainty and maybe the changes along the way with tariffs have been a real challenge for us. The way that we've dealt with that is kind of dual tracking projects. So there might be a project that traditionally we would have made a call pretty early on whether that was going to be a domestically manufactured or an imported project. In a lot of cases, we are either planning a hybrid approach where we're going to manufacture some components, import others. In other cases, we may be dual tracking a sourcing between two countries. So it may be that we're working on a project in China and Vietnam, really not knowing where we're ultimately going to go. And so that's driving more costs, a little bit more indecision, and more friction into the process. One of the biggest impacts of the tariffs for us has been customer demand, particularly in the industrial workplace environment. We're selling factory break rooms. I think as the tariffs came to the forefront and kind of changed and there was uncertainty there, perhaps leadership, CFOs, the one thing they could control was investment in capital projects. And that's something we've seen. We saw that start to have an impact in late April into May. It has gotten better as we've ended up the third quarter, but that's certainly something to keep in mind that, regardless of what a policy is, the uncertainty of where it's going can just cause people to hesitate.
Awesome. And that was a nice segue to the next topic, which is tariffs. Obviously, this is a new topic we covered this year in our survey. Big picture in terms of where manufacturers are on it, they clearly aren't panicking about tariffs yet. 82% of manufacturers in our survey said they're confident that their company can successfully navigate the current tariff and trade environment. 39% said they are very confident. Only 16% of manufacturers say they are not. And when we looked at this data by different types of manufacturers, those in the Twin Cities metro areas, companies that are in greater Minnesota, those with lower revenues, those with higher revenues, those with 50 or fewer employees, 50 plus, the data was remarkably consistent. Manufacturers, for the most part, are pretty confident that they have the skills to navigate the current trade and tariff environment. So what are manufacturers doing to handle tariffs? We see really kind of three things here. First, raise prices. 49% of manufacturers tell they're passing tariff-related costs onto their customers. They've either already done that or currently doing it. Another 23% are considering it. That would be 3 out of 4 manufacturers either doing it or considering it. Increasing sourcing from U.S. suppliers. So buying local, 47% of manufacturers say they're already done it or currently doing it. Another 20% are considering it. When it comes to financial forecasts and budgets, a lot of them are breaking out the whiteout. 38% said they are either already doing it or currently doing it. Another 19% are considering it. And then stockpiling key materials, 32% of manufacturers said they've already done that or currently doing that. You can see in this data that the larger manufacturers clearly have more levers to pull, and they certainly appear like they're pulling them when it comes to addressing tariffs. The smaller manufacturers are primarily focused on passing those costs on to their customers and increasing supplies, sourcing from U.S. suppliers, whereas the larger manufacturers are doing that, also adjusting their financial forecasts and budgets. 56% of manufacturers have already, larger manufacturers already done that or doing that. And even down at the bottom there, stockpiling key materials, 49% of the larger manufacturers have either done it or doing it or considering doing it in order to counter the tariffs. So next, let's talk about something that I think everyone has an opinion on, and that's government mandates. For manufacturers in our survey this year, about 3 out of 4 of them said that the paid family or the paid leave mandates are having a significant impact on their bottom line. We gave them 2 different legislative developments here and asked them to what degree is it impacting or affecting your business. At the top of this is the cost associated with funding the new paid family and medical leave program. 41% of manufacturers say it's having a major effect on their business. That's up 9 points from when we tested the same exact topic a year ago. Another 32% said it's having a minor effect. Added those two together gets us to 73% that say it's having an effect. Only 21% said it's not having an effect on their company. We see very similar numbers down at the bottom there, the requirements of an employer for paid sick and safe time. 37% of manufacturers say it's having a major effect on their business. That's up 8 points from a year ago. Another 35% minor effect, so 72% believe or say it's having an effect on their particular business. And what's fascinating about this data from my perspective is the changes that we've seen, particularly with larger manufacturers, so those with more than 50 employees, from where we were a year ago. Here we're looking at just the percent who say it's having a major effect on their business. And the light red bars there, the sort of pinkish bars, are the numbers from last year. The darker red bars are what we see in this year's data. And there's been increases in terms of the effect, major effect, for both smaller and larger manufacturers, but those increases have been noticeably higher with your larger manufacturers. So if you start with the left-hand side there, the cost associated with funding that new paid family and medical leave program. A year ago, 26% of manufacturers say it was having a major effect on their business. It's not quite doubled, but it's gone up 17 points this year with 43%. Similarly, the requirements of an employer for paid and safe time, 24% a year ago. Today, larger manufacturers, 36%, tell us it's having a major effect on their company. But let's be clear, both of these legislative mandates are impacting manufacturers regardless of size, regardless of location, regardless of revenue. As you can see here, a solid majority say it's having either a major or minor effect on their business. But here again, we do see those larger companies reporting slightly more of an impact. Those with over $5 million annually in revenue, 81% say both of these legislative developments are having an effect on their bottom line. Which brings us to the last question, which we've talked a lot about optimism, but I think it sort of stops at the border when it comes to Minnesota, because we asked, based on these legislative developments, do you think it's made Minnesota a more attractive or less attractive place to do business, or has it not really had an effect one way or the other? And a year ago, 65% of manufacturers told us those developments have made the state less attractive for businesses. That number is up to 70% this year, and close to half of all manufacturers, 46%, say these legislative developments have made the state much less attractive to do business. And while there are some differences by types of manufacturers, it's an overwhelming majority that agree that the state is less attractive to business because of these legislative developments. And we got one last set of videos here.
With the new FMLA changes and some of the law changes here in the state of Minnesota, clarity is really important to us as an employer. There's some vagueness in the legislation that makes it challenging to navigate. I think in general, the overall consensus is that these new changes are very onerous. They make it very difficult to do business in the state of Minnesota. And again, we want to try to navigate through them to the best of our ability, but some of the pieces of legislation that I've read lack clarity. And it's important that we understand, number one, so we can abide by it, and two, that we can communicate that effectively to our employees so they understand it as well. But in general, unfortunately, I think it makes the business climate in Minnesota much more challenging to operate in.
Here at MTG, when it comes to family leave, we have always encouraged, take the time off if you have to. If you have family members that need tending to, we have always encouraged that. Regarding the new January 1st policy for family medical leave, the challenge comes from understanding smaller manufacturing shops. If you're down one employee, if you're down two employees for a series of months, it can really stress lead times. It can stress deadlines. With this new policy, it opens a door for the ability for some people to overuse the 20-week leave time that they can take. And for small manufacturers, that can pose a real challenge. Yeah, if I do have 1 or 2 employees out on medical leave, it could mean up to 15 to 20% of lost revenue from lost production.
Something that the business community can and should do immediately is engage their local representatives and senators. Have them out for a tour, talk to them about your business, the unique challenges, and do that especially in the very metro area and suburban area. Those are the areas where I've seen representatives have a disconnect on how business actually works. The more you can engage them, the better.
On the positive side, we see in this year's data, manufacturers, for the most part, are feeling a little bit better. We've seen confidence rebound. We've seen talk or concerns about recession and inflation ease considerably. At the same time, most manufacturers tell us that the economy is flat, not necessarily growing, but flattening. And a majority tell us that the business climate in the state has gotten worse over the last 5 years, numbers that aren't much different than what we saw a year ago. In terms of the issues and concerns, we've seen the workforce shortage concerns soften a little bit. It's still a significant concern. But in its place this year, we've seen concerns about government policies, regulation, taxes, and tariffs now rise to the top of the list of concerns that manufacturers have. And specifically on some of the legislative developments that we talked about here. 7 out of 10 manufacturers say that these have made the state less attractive. 3 out of 4 tell us it's having a real impact on their bottom lines. Particularly larger manufacturers, more so this year than what we saw last year, are particularly concerned about these mandates. And then we continue to see the adoption of AI and automation rise among manufacturers. They're increasingly relying on it to help increase productivity, eliminate the boring tasks, the things they do not want to do, but they are concerned about the cost and the system integration. Those are the 2 big barriers that we've seen in this year's survey. In terms of how they're using it, they see when it comes to decision-making, data analysis, workflow efficiency, and again, automating those repetitive tasks is where they see the biggest upside with automation and AI. And then hope on a short leash, which is probably, hope is also wearing probably a safety vest too. I think just to drive that point home a little bit more. Economic confidence is back, but they're cautiously re-engaging and planning an investment. And they're certainly worried about the state legislative and regulatory environment. That really, we see in this data, continues to be a drag on long-term confidence among manufacturers. So thank you again for letting me share this data, and I'm going to turn it back over to Bob.
Well, he was just kidding you. I'm standing in your way. Just a few thoughts as we capture what our great manufacturers said in the video. I heard the words thoughtful automation. As manufacturers, we love to buy machines. I have a half a garage full of machines I don't need. It wasn't very thoughtful. Think about it. Willy Shih talked about continuous improvement. And manufacturers have led the way on what we used to call lean manufacturing. And it used to be a tool, and it didn't work. Now it's a culture. It's about shifting our culture. That's the key. And I would say that when you think about the family leave, it's not very value add to the great companies in this state. We already take care of our employees because if we didn't, they'd go across the street and get a job. So it's really important to keep this all in perspective, which leads us to why the front of the magazine says the state of red tape. Take it and share it with someone who maybe isn't fully convinced of that, but that's what's affecting your business. I'd like to re-thank our platinum sponsors. This is a phenomenal group of people. Every one of them sees manufacturing as a core industry that they serve. Stop by, thank them for their support, learn more about what they do outside. They each have a booth. I'd also like to remind you that we go around the state to 6 more locations from Redwood Falls to Owatonna. And we draw on average 50 to 100 individuals that join us there. So it's a wonderful networking, but it gets us a flavor of what's going on regionally and how some of the things you just saw are affecting us there. You know, as the people at Enterprise Minnesota know, I'm from Missouri. That means you got to show me. And I have a license plate at home of the Missouri Show Me State because one of our guys decided that I needed to convince him that I could do something, and I said, "You'll never make it happen." And he did. But over the years, I've always resisted sharing our expertise of our consultants with people in industries outside of manufacturing. And finally, the staff beat me down. We now, we work with 2 of our community technical colleges to help them do strategic planning and operational efficiency. We work with a pharmaceutical company. We also work with a large IT firm. And so, I've finally given in and kind of announcing tonight that, if you want to take advantage of some of the great things that manufacturers do, and continuous improvement, talent leadership, we'd love to work with you. I'd also like to thank our legislators that took time to join us tonight. They truly are supporters. I know all of those that came, and appreciate Tom for being part of the video. You've got a 3rd career now. Not only are you going to the legislature, but you got a manufacturing company, but Hollywood will be calling you. And then lastly, thank all the manufacturers who took time. I say often, people get sick of hearing it, money's precious, time is more precious because we cannot get it back. So thank you all for joining us. Enjoy the rest of the evening. And with that, the networking reception awaits you. Thank you much. Have a good night.